Hi everyone. So I was watching some coverage of the second round of the French presidential debate, and Emmanuel Macron has won re-election. He's the first French president to do so since Jacques Chirac some 20 years ago when he defeated Jean-Marie Le Pen in the 2002 election. Macron secured re-election. That's not overly surprising. It was predicted. Nevertheless, it's interesting to see that his victory speech wasn't overly triumphalist. Um, One gets a sense of some modesty there, and this is interesting from a man who's often accused of arrogance and elitism. Um, I haven't been watching this campaign very closely, sort of on and off. There's obviously been other things going on, but France is a major power, so its direction matters. The final results, as I understand it, were 58% for Macron, 42% for Marine Le Pen. But there was a very high abstention rate, 28%. Um, a lot of people, particularly young people, just didn't feel enthusiastic enough to vote for either candidate. Um, of the two candidates, I I feel that this was probably the right choice. I don't entirely trust Marine Le Pen, and it's nothing to do with her designated far right views. I'll come to that in a minute. It's because I just don't trust her on Russia and on Putin. I think this side of it has been underreported. A lot of the focus has been on her policies on headscarves and so on, but I think her world views and her attitude to geopolitics warrant some scrutiny. For a lot of British people on the right, they've been sort of unofficially looking at Marine Le Pen, and by the right, I mean the populist right, not necessarily um, centre ground conservatives. They've been looking at Marine Le Pen as sort of a French Nigel Farage, something along those lines. There's been talks of a Frexit. Um, how close would Marine Le Pen be? I mean, this is all retrospective now. She's not going to be president. But how close would she have been to the UK? I'm not sure. I think she has been on the record as praising the British for Brexit, so read into that what you will. But I don't trust her on Putin. And I think, like a lot of people on the hard right in the West, her attitude to Putin and her whole approach to Putin is very questionable. Viktor Orban is another example. And yeah, I would say Donald Trump. Um, this is the cover of the Week magazine last week. I think they do fantastic covers. I think their artwork's amazing. This is last week. I mean, I think the quality of those cartoons are among the very best around. And I hope the Week continues to do that format. I think they're well known for it. Um, If you're not familiar, this is a British current affairs newspaper magazine. It's also published in the United States. They have a very good format. Actually, I'll quickly show you if you're not familiar with it, where they have this world panorama. So it's made in such a way where it's serious journalism, but it's easy to read. It's concise. Um, so we have a roundup of stories from around the world. So the Shanghai lockdown. The Australian general election is coming up. Scott Morrison has announced that. What else do we have? Will Smith being banned from the Oscars. Mexican President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador um, has won a vote of confidence, not a presidential election, but a vote of confidence. Unrest has continued in Lima. This is from last week, of course, with anger against the Peruvian president Pedro Castillo. Um, the ex-president in Burkina Faso, Blaise Compaoré, has been found guilty of complicity in the 1987 murder of his predecessor, Thomas Sankara, who was known as the Che Guevara of Africa. Imran Khan has stood in Pakistan. Some others I've already covered. There's an investigation into a massacre in Mali, about 300 civilians killed. Um, anyway, they do a roundup of world stories, and the cover story is, of course, French presidential election. There's also, I'm going to read this now, although it's kind of retrospective now. The Economist magazine, they have a piece on it. This, of course, was exactly the same face-off in 2017. Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen. Macron made history by being the youngest French president ever, and among the youngest world leaders. I mean, it's quite something. Whatever people think of Macron, to become president of France at the age of 39 is something. I mean, I still find it incredible that this guy is only a few years older than myself. Um, and he's president of France. So it's, by a few years, I don't mean a couple of years, but not really. It's he's president of France and he's still a young man. But I think that his speech tonight in Paris was statesmanlike. When his supporters were booing Le Pen supporters, he drew back on that and said, "No, no, don't boo. We don't boo anyone." Interestingly, Le Pen in her speech didn't congratulate Macron once, which can come across as a bit, well, read into that what you will. But the parliamentary elections are coming up, so I think Macron's right not to be complacent. I mentioned the Pen stance on Putin. Macron's stance on Putin, these meetings he's been having, there's a bit of a Neville Chamberlain air about that. I'm not so sure if that is if it's working. I think there's probably good intentions behind it, but I just don't think it's working. I'm not sure you can negotiate with someone like Vladimir Putin, especially as civilians continue to die. Another 8 killed today on Odessa, I believe. So I can understand why Zelensky has somewhat given Macron the cold shoulder. Having said that, a quick word about Munich and Chamberlain. I watched a very good not documentary, dramatization made quite recently. I think it was 2021, starring Jeremy Irons in the title role as Chamberlain. Um, I think it was Munich. The I forget the precise title, but it was very good. And they took a different angle on it. They said that actually, far from being naive and far from being an act of appeasement, Chamberlain knew full well that Hitler couldn't be trusted, and Munich was actually to buy time. And by stalling this, i.e., by distracting Hitler or by having this agreement, it actually allowed the British Empire to buy time to build up armament. It's one theory, it's what they sort of conclude with. It will, of course, be controversial. Now, will history look back on Emmanuel Macron negatively and see him as an appeaser of this tyrant in Moscow? I do believe that Putin is a big threat to Europe since Hitler. I have no problem saying that. That's something that makes me concerned about Le Pen, the fact that she wants to scale back French involvement in NATO, and I just don't think she can be trusted as you know, uh, an internationalist when it comes to the West being united on these things. I mean, it's all very well saying that she's a patriot and she's going to stand up to Islamists, and that's very important actually. But I'm an internationalist. I do not agree with these people who think that nation states looking outwards and wanting to do the work of partners is somehow a bad thing. I think it's perfectly compatible to be pro sovereignty, to be patriotic, whilst also recognizing that the world's interconnected. That doesn't mean blind globalization. It doesn't mean unlimited immigration. But I think, when we look at people like Donald Trump, Marine Le Pen, Viktor Orban, and yeah, to some extent Brexit, to some extent, and I'm putting that with a caution because I know it's not exactly the same thing. Um, I am not convinced that it is the best way forward. Having said that, Macron's right not to be too triumphalist because he knows that a lot of people voted for his rival. She didn't win, but she done very well. I believe much better than her father in 2002. Marine Le Pen's no fool. She's astute enough to have modernised her party, even to the point where other figures on the far right, Eric Zemmour and so on, have called her soft. Um, Now, about that label far right, I do wonder is the designation even is almost redundant because you get I was watching this on CNN, BBC, Euronews, and they're all saying far right candidate Marine Le Pen. I think she genuinely has modernised her party. That doesn't mean I trust her. That doesn't mean I don't think that some of her policies are questionable. Now, the thing about banning the headscarf, I appreciate her argument. I do think that it's something that shouldn't be promoted in the West at the very least. The problem is banning it. Um, should that be the priority? The thing is, France is a country, perhaps more than any other Western country, that has really, really experienced the violence and the intolerance of pan-Islamism more than most other Western countries. This is a country that has, particularly in the Francois Hollande era, terrorist attack after terrorist attack. Hundreds were killed and wounded. In fact, when we include the wounded, probably thousands. Um, this is a country that saw a teacher beheaded because he was deemed to have insulted Islam. This is a country that saw a teenage girl go into hiding for her life for the same reason. Um, so I think anyone analysing French politics regarding Islam would have to look at that context. You know, outsiders can't say French politicians are being populist or reactionary when this is a country that has experienced firsthand pan-Islamism. This week in Sweden, there were riots because apparently a Danish politician had proposed to burn the Quran. Now, I wouldn't advocate burning the Quran. I think that's inflammatory and unnecessary, and I think it polarizes ordinary Muslims. But what was the response of Islamists in Sweden? Burning police cars, rioting. Um, I think the great multicultural experiment of the Nordic states really is flawed. I do not believe that Islamic theocracy and Islamism are compatible with Western democracy. I just don't believe they are. So this idea that if a leader is tough on Islam, he or she is far right in of itself, I think is ridiculous. Um, Perhaps the fact that Marine Le Pen has modernized her party, detoxified her party on some level. You know, it's no longer virulently anti-Semitic or anything like that. Um, I think that perhaps warrants into scrutiny. Should it really be designated as far right? Because then it's saying almost, you know, everyone who voted for her is far right. I think it's a little bit of a lazy characterization, quite honestly, and it's overused. By certainly, you have blood and soil nationalist groups within Europe. Some of them quite active. Um, it's questionable how much parliamentary support they have or success they have. But you know, you have groups that are definitely dodgy across Europe, in France, in Germany, in Britain, um, and elsewhere. And they have some extreme views. They're outright Holocaust deniers in some cases. They're violent. I'm thinking of in the UK, Combat 18, and there's others. To what extent these people have support is a matter of debate. But in every country, they have had some influence. But I would still argue that the influence they have, and certainly the manifestation of violence, is secondary to what we have seen from extremist Islam. In fact, if we're talking in pure raw data, frankly, the number of people who have died from Islamist extremism in Europe over the past 20, 30 years is significantly higher than the number of people who've died from far right extremism in Europe over the past 20 or 30 years. The big exception with that, of course, is the Norway terrorist attacks of 2011. But when you consider the number of Islamist atrocities, Paris 2015, Nice 2016, Manchester 2017, London 2017, Brussels 2016, um, it, you know, the list goes on and on. Madrid 2004, London 2005. The number of violent pan-Islamist attacks that this continent has experienced, and that's not even anything compared to what West Africa, the Middle East, and other parts of the world have experienced. Pan-Islamism is a menace to human rights, it's a menace to free societies, and I think we need to take a hard line against it. And as for Islamic countries lecturing the West on how we should approach this, they can, you know, they can maybe come back and lecture the West when they improve their own dismal records on human rights and their dismal records on treatment of minorities. Um, so I understand the context of why Marine Le Pen is getting the support she's getting. I don't entirely trust her, and for that reason, um, I think if she'd won tonight, I'd have some concerns. Not about her stance on Islam, but rather her stance on worldviews. About Bennett banning the headscarf, again, I understand the context here. She argues it's enslaving women. She argues that there isn't any real choice, despite what Muslim women say. There's been a few exchanges she's had on the campaign trail. Um, I just don't know if it should be the priority. And I also think there is a fundamental question of liberty. I mean, wherever we think of the hijab, ultimately, should politicians really tell women what to wear or not? Um, I don't think it should be promoted. I certainly don't think it should be promoted. Not the hijab, definitely not the niqab or burqa. Ultimately, should women be told what to do? I think that I would say this though: women who wear the niqab and the burqa, I think they need to practice what they preach. If they're saying we have free choice and this is what we choose to wear, because this is something that frankly applies across the West, they need to be just as vocal in defending the rights of women not to wear it. And they need to say, to Islamist men, back off. We as Muslim women are choosing to wear this. Right, well, if that's really your choice, then prove it. Stand up for your sisters who choose not to wear it. Because the fact of the matter is, Muslim women who choose not to wear it get shamed, um, and they're accused of being too westernized. So I think there has to be a debate around that. But I'm just not sure that banning the headscarf should be the number one priority. I think Marine Le Pen would be better to focus on Islamist cells and what Islamist men are preaching in France. I think she should put her focus on that rather than something that I just don't think it should be the priority. I understand the argument. It's all about culture. It's all about attitudes to culture. But I just not. I'm not convinced it should be the priority because all that does is it kind of galvanizes them to say, "Oh, look at the hypocritical West. They're talking about freedom, but they're taking away Muslim women's right to choose." I think it's a flawed argument. I think there are dubious issues around choice on that, and I think there is also very unhealthy this mindset about morality, which is the implication that women who don't wear it are somehow loose or immoral. I think that needs to be scrutinized, and I think Islamist men and Muslim women who promote it, their attitude to, morality needs to be questioned. I.e., do they see women who don't wear it as immoral, which is most women in the West, including, by the way, many Muslim women. So their attitude to those women needs to be scrutinized. You're demanding the right to wear the headscarf. Okay, that's your right, but will you respect the right of women not to wear it, and do you accept that there's nothing immoral about not wearing it? Or this modesty doctrine? That's what I would question. Anyway, I'll round this up. Like I say, Macron was statesman-like. I haven't looked at domestic policies that much in other areas, but those are the two that have been reported sort of on outside of France. A lot of French people seem to be disillusioned. That high abstention rate, every politician in France needs to look at that. Young French people, from what I gather, they're like young people anywhere. Very into green issues, very woke. There was an academic speaking about how Macron apparently was not keen on critical race theory and other such issues that go into the French curriculum. Well, quite right, good. Um, I do think there should be a pushback against the Atlanticist woke culture. I think that's how Macron sees it, and I think he's right. Our relations to France, I'll just close with this, have certainly not been great. Now, I do think Macron has a somewhat arrogant attitude to Brexit. He needs to respect democracy. Fundamentally, he needs to respect democracy. Um, and I think that certainly some of the way that he's approached this has come across as quite unstatesmanlike and undiplomatic in terms of how he's approached post-Brexit Britain. Having said that, I think that this is a two-sided thing, and I think that when it comes to like the migrant issue and so on, I think the French could certainly do more. But look at Ukraine. I mean, we have been absolutely woeful in the number of visas we've put out. Most other European countries, including France, have done a lot better. I believe that we should have strong relations with France. Clearly, there's some significant differences that we've got over this channel issue, and I hope those can be resolved in the next 5 years. Whether Johnson is in office that long, who knows? But it makes no sense to me to have constant feuding with our closest neighbour or one of our closest neighbours. That's not to say we should just pander to some of France's positions. I think there's times that Macron has been less than statesmanlike when it comes to Britain, but it just makes no sense. I think some British tabloids revel in having bad relations with France, and I think it's not something I relish at all. Okay, I'll round it up there. I think Macron certainly has to. I think he was right not to be too triumphalist. I think he would be justified in trying to pitch to those Le Pen voters. It's going to be difficult because they have contempt for Macron. Um, but if Marine Le Pen is truly a stateswoman, then she will want to work together as well, rather than just stoking up further divisions. Maybe there's areas they can work together on. Okay, I'll round it up there. If you're in France, let me know your thoughts.